For over 2,100 years, the true identity of black people has been buried under layers of conquest, colonization, misinformation, and silence. But today, in this very moment, the truth begins to rise again, not with rage, but with revelation. The story of black people did not begin with slavery, oppression, or chains. It began long before that, rooted in greatness, divine selection, ancient knowledge, and sacred purpose. What has been kept in shadows must now be brought into the light, because when a people forget who they are, they become what the world tells them. But when a people remember, they rise. For centuries, the narrative surrounding black identity has been controlled by those who never intended to uplift it. History books have skipped over empires that once ruled with wisdom. Education systems have left out truths that could have restored dignity. Media has recycled stereotypes that never reflected the reality. But despite all this, truth has a way of surviving. And though 2,700 years may feel like a long time, in the eyes of destiny, it is merely the time it takes for a sleeping giant to open its eyes. That time has come. The evidence is not just in books, ruins, or artifacts. It is in the spirit, in the resilience, in the culture, and in the echo of a voice that refuses to be silenced. Before the chains, there were crowns. Before the plantations, there were palaces. Before the colonies, there were civilization. Black people are not a footnote in someone else's history. They are the headline in their own. They were builders of cities before skyscrapers were imagined, astronomers before telescopes, mathematicians before calculators, doctors before stethoscopes. This is not mythology. It is history that was deliberately pushed aside. The DNA of greatness still runs through the veins of every black man and woman walking this earth today. It is not arrogance to reclaim that truth. It is restoration. If you trace the lineages of ancient kingdoms, from Kush to Nubia, from Aksum to Songhai, you'll find a pattern: innovation, leadership, spiritual wisdom, and divine favor. These weren't accidental empires. They were the result of a people aligned with purpose. These kingdoms left behind more than ruins. They left behind proof that black excellence is not new. It is ancestral. Yet somehow, after thousands of years, that identity was distorted. Some were taken from their land. Others were stripped of their names, their languages erased, their traditions demonized, their skin criminalized. But what never left them was the essence. You can take people from their homeland, but you can't take the homeland out of their soul. The real identity of black people cannot be confined to slavery, because that is not where it began. It cannot be defined by poverty, because that is not the original condition. It cannot be explained by inferiority, because nothing about their creation was accidental or less. When you look across the world today and see the rhythm, style, creativity, language, strength, and perseverance of black communities, you are not seeing survival. You are seeing ancient greatness adapting to modern challenges. You are seeing descendants of kings and queens walking through a world that has forgotten, but they are starting to remember. This remembrance is not about revenge, it is about revival. When a people remember who they are, they start to move differently. They raise their standards. They reclaim their values. They educate their children with truth. They look in the mirror with pride. They don't look to the world to define them. They define themselves. And when that starts to happen, a shift begins. A spiritual awakening, a historical correction, a global realization. Because you cannot hide the truth forever. You can suppress it. You can rewrite it. But you cannot kill it. And here's the most powerful part. This awakening is not just about black people. It is for the world, because when the world finally understands the true contributions, identity, and dignity of black people, then humanity as a whole becomes more balanced. Truth heals. Understanding brings peace. Acknowledging the past allows us to build a better future. But it must begin with honesty. And honesty requires courage. So where do we go from here? We stop waiting for the world to validate us. We start digging deeper into the knowledge that was left for us through oral traditions, ancestral wisdom, unfiltered history, and spiritual understanding. We lift up our brothers and sisters with dignity. We walk with a quiet confidence, not because of what we've achieved, but because of who we've always been. We reject every label that was never meant for us, and we wear the truth like armor. Education becomes our weapon, not to fight, but to rebuild. We teach the next generation not just about slavery, but about sovereignty. Not just about survival, but about invention. Not just about oppression, but about origin. We let them know that their skin is not a curse, it is a crown. That their features are not flawed, they are sacred. That their voice is not too loud, it is necessary. That their roots are not weak, they run deeper than the foundations of most nations. After 2,700 years, the silence is breaking. After centuries of manipulation, the clarity is returning. After generations of confusion, the compass is realigning. The world is beginning to realize something powerful. Black history is not just a month, not just a subject, not just a legacy. It is a mirror into the soul of civilization itself. And that soul is resilient. It is majestic. It is unbreakable. It is time to return to who you truly are. Not the version that was handed to you, but the one that was written into your DNA by destiny itself. This is a call to remember, not just for knowledge, but for power. Not for ego, but for purpose. When a people rise from 2,700 years of silence with clarity, grace, and truth, they don't just reclaim their place in history, they reshape the future. The journey ahead is not easy. The systems of this world are not built to celebrate the rise of the forgotten. But it does not matter, because the truth doesn't need permission to exist. It just needs bold people to speak it. You were never meant to blend in. You were born to stand out. You were never created to be hidden. You were chosen to lead. The pain of the past does not define you. It refines you. The loss of identity was not the end. It was the preparation for the return. The world tried to erase your name, but they could not erase your essence. And now that you know who you are, there's only one thing left to do: walk in it. Walk in the fullness of your truth. Walk in the authority of your heritage. Walk in the dignity of your calling. No more shrinking. No more apologizing. No more waiting for permission. The real identity of black people has been revealed, not because the world gave it back, but because it was never truly lost. It was always there, waiting for the right time to rise again, and that time is now. Let the world watch as you walk with your head held high, not in arrogance, but in awareness. Because when you know who you are, no one can tell you what you're not. Black history didn't begin in chains, it began in glory. It didn't begin on auction blocks, but in palaces built by hands that shaped civilization itself. For too long, the story of black people has been reduced to a single chapter filled with suffering, but that was never the beginning. The truth runs deeper than what was taught in classrooms, preached in pulpits, or written in Western textbooks. The story of black identity starts in sovereignty, in lands where black people ruled with wisdom, governed with fairness, built with genius, and worshiped with deep spiritual understanding. Before the world labeled black skin as a curse, it was seen as a symbol of divine power and natural beauty. There was a time when the world came to Africa to learn, to trade, to admire. The black man was not seen as a slave, but as a scholar. The black woman was not seen as a servant, but as a queen. And that truth cannot be forgotten any longer. Long before the arrival of colonizers and the deception of missionaries, there existed civilizations that rivaled the greatest empires in human history. From the mighty pyramids of Nubia to the ancient libraries of Timbuktu, black minds were crafting architecture, science, astronomy, and medicine far beyond their time. The city of Carthage stood as a symbol of strength and innovation. The empire of Mali under Mansa Musa displayed wealth and intellect that left the world in awe. The kingdom of Kush influenced both African and Middle Eastern history. These were not backward societies. They were advanced, educated, spiritual, and free. The image of Africa as poor and helpless is a modern invention, carefully crafted to hide the truth that black people were once masters of the very systems now used to oppress them. There was a time when the drumbeat of Africa was not one of sorrow but celebration. Languages flowed freely. Families were intact. Elders passed down wisdom that had been carried through generations. Every village had a rhythm, a law, a structure, a soul. People lived in harmony with nature, not in destruction of it. There were universities, trade routes, spiritual temples, and royal courts long before Europe discovered the printing press. The influence of ancient black civilizations reached the corners of the earth through knowledge, through culture, through diplomacy. And this wasn't just about survival, it was about advancement. It was about leading the world in ways we no longer learn about. Because those who rewrote history knew that if the world ever remembered, the system would collapse. When colonizers arrived, they didn't find savages. They found brilliance. They found order. They found power. And to control that power, they had to first rewrite the story. They changed the narrative from royalty to slavery. They took away the names, the gods, the languages, and the legacy. They replaced truth with lies and told generations of black children that their history began with chains, not crowns. And over time, those lies became beliefs. Those beliefs became systems, and those systems became our reality. But even buried under centuries of distortion, the truth never died. It lived in the songs of the elders, in the rhythm of the drum, in the spirit of resistance. It lived in the bloodline. It waited patiently to rise again. And now that time has come. More and more black people are awakening to who they really are. They are no longer accepting the version of themselves handed down by colonizers. They are searching deeper. They are finding their roots. They are uncovering the brilliance of their ancestors. They are realizing that their worth is not determined by outside validation, but by inner revelation. And that revelation is this: you come from greatness, not just from survival, but from sovereignty. You are the descendant of thinkers, builders, healers, creators, rulers. Your story didn't start in the bottom of a slave ship. It started on the top of a throne. And though that throne may have been stolen, the power that built it still lives in you. This isn't about arrogance. It's about awareness. Because once you know where you come from, you walk differently. You talk differently. You raise your children differently. You dream differently. You stop settling. You stop shrinking. You stop doubting. You realize that you were never inferior, only misinformed. The narrative was manipulated. Not because it wasn't powerful, but because it was too powerful. They had to suppress it so they could rise. But now that you know the truth, you don't need to fight for a seat at their table. You can build your own. You don't need to beg for recognition. You can stand in the authority of who you've always been. It's not enough to remember once a year. It's not enough to celebrate for 1 month. This truth should be lived every day. Every time you speak truth to power, every time you pass on knowledge, every time you build with purpose, you are reclaiming what was stolen. Every time you refuse to believe you are less than, you are restoring a legacy. Black history is not a moment. It's a movement back to origin, back to royalty, back to dignity. And when enough people return to that truth, the world will never be the same. Because when a people rise with knowledge of who they really are, nothing on earth can stop them. For generations, black people have carried names that were never their own, spoken languages that were forced upon them, and lived under systems that never had their empowerment in mind. When the ships arrived, it wasn't just bodies that were taken, it was identities, erased or rewritten to serve another narrative. Cultures rich with history, spirituality, and meaning were reduced to shadows. Names that once meant strength, wisdom, light, and leader were stripped away and replaced with the names of those who claimed ownership. It wasn't just a tactic of control, it was an attack on memory. Because when you erase someone's name, you don't just take their title, you try to remove their meaning. And for centuries, this silence around origin created a deep void, a disconnect from self, a confusion passed down through generations who grew up asking, "Who am I, really?" Language is more than words. It's the sound of a people's soul. It holds memory, value, rhythm, and spirit. When that language is taken, so is the way a people connect with their root, spiritual systems, ways of living, ways of honoring life and community, all replaced by structures that often brought guilt instead of growth. The colonizers didn't just want to dominate land, they needed to dominate mind. And so the stripping began. Names gone, languages forbidden, ceremonies outlawed, elders silenced. All that remained was a shell of what once was, and within that shell, a quiet ache for something that could not be named, but always felt missing. Yet despite all of that, something sacred endured. A whisper passed down through the bloodline, a rhythm that showed up in music, a spirit that showed up in resistance, a memory that survived in tradition. It was never truly lost, only hidden. What was taken could be remembered. What was silenced could be spoken again. And slowly, generation after generation, that remembering began. It started in homes, in classrooms, in late-night conversations, in books that dared to tell the truth. People began to ask questions. They began to look deeper. They began to uncover what had been buried. And when they found it, it was like finding gold in the soil. The legacy had never died. It had only been buried beneath lies. Today, that rediscovery is more powerful than ever. Across the world, black people are tracing their lineages, learning the languages of their ancestors, reclaiming the original meanings of their names, and building back what was taken. They're wearing their history with pride, not shame. They're standing taller because they know where they come from. They're not waiting for validation. They're finding power in the truth. And with each name restored, each language spoken again, each tradition revived, the identity becomes whole once more. Not the version handed down by systems of control, but the original divine version written in the soul from the beginning. It's not just about knowing history, it's about knowing yourself. It's about looking in the mirror and seeing royalty instead of regret. It's about unlearning the lies told to grandparents and parents and choosing a new story to pass down to the next generation. It's about honoring the pain but not letting it define you. It's about taking back what was stolen, not through violence, but through clarity, through education, through truth. Because the greatest revenge is restoration. The most powerful healing comes not from anger, but from knowing exactly who you are, and never letting the world make you forget again. And so the journey continues, not backward, but forward. With every child given a name that carries legacy, with every elder whose voice is finally heard, with every ceremony brought back to life, a people once scattered are becoming whole again. This is not nostalgia, it's rebirth. This is not about exclusion, it's about returning to balance. Identity was never meant to be handed to you by someone else. It was meant to rise from within. And now that rise is unstoppable. The reclamation has begun, and the world will feel its power. Not because it seeks dominance, but because it seeks to finally be seen in full truth. There is a silence that does not come from peace, but from suppression. It is the kind of silence that grows when voices are intentionally ignored, when truths are buried, when the world looks away from the contributions that shaped it. For centuries, black people have lived under that silence. Not because they had nothing to offer, but because what they had to offer was too powerful, too transformational, too threatening to the systems built around control. That silence was not a result of absence, it was a result of erasure. And yet, even in the midst of that silence, something survived. Something deeper than words. A fire that could not be extinguished. A spirit that could not be crushed. A people who, though buried by history, were never broken by it. There are moments in time when it seems the world conspires to make a people forget who they are. History books skip entire civilizations, reduce great empires to a paragraph, and erase names that once commanded respect across continents. Generations grow up learning about their worth through the eyes of others, and in that version, their story always begins at the bottom. The black narrative was twisted to begin with bondage, to focus only on pain, to highlight struggle without acknowledging the strength behind it. The goal was not just to control the body, but to erase the memory, so that those who descended from kings, queens, scholars, scientists, and warriors would question their very existence. But that plan was never complete, because the soul holds memory that time cannot erase. Even in silence, black brilliance expressed itself. It sang in the blues, danced in the streets, marched in protest, painted visions, built communities, and loved with power. The world may not have always listened, but the work was still being done. Black minds were inventing, creating, writing, and leading, often without credit, often behind the scenes, often unheard. But silence is not the same as absence. It is not the same as consent. It is not the same as defeat. In fact, sometimes silence is just a seed in the dark, waiting for the right time to rise through the soil and stretch into the light. Today, that seed has broken through. The silence is cracking open, and the truth is echoing across the globe. People are waking up not just to what was done to them, but to who they've always been. They are not asking for permission to be seen. They are claiming their space, their story, their legacy. They are no longer waiting for institutions to approve their value. They are building their own tables, their own platforms, their own futures. What was once hidden is now in full view, and it is beautiful, undeniable, and rising fast. The beauty of this awakening is that it does not seek revenge. It seeks restoration. It does not demand destruction. It demands truth. And the truth is that black people have never been background characters in the story of humanity. They are central to its progress, its rhythm, its survival. The pyramids still stand. The music still moves the world. The language of resistance is still spoken. The wisdom of ancestors is still alive. Every contribution that was ignored still echoes in the culture we live in today. And now more people are connecting the dots, finding their roots, and standing taller because of. This is more than a cultural shift. It is a spiritual reawakening. It is the return of a voice that was never truly gone, only waiting to be heard again. This moment in time is not a trend. It is a return to self. A people once pushed to the margins are stepping boldly into the center, not by force, but by truth. Because the truth does not need to fight to exist. It only needs to be revealed. And now that it has been, there is no turning back. The silence has served its time, but it is no longer welcome. What comes next is clarity, pride, purpose, and power. Not given but claimed, not inherited through systems, but remembered through spirit. This is the era where forgotten names are spoken again, where stories once lost are finally told, where greatness once hidden now shines in full view. Black people were buried in silence, but not broken by it. What the world tried to keep quiet is now being shouted from every corner. And as this awakening spreads, it does not just liberate one people, it opens the eyes of all who have been asleep. The silence is over, the rising has begun, and there is nothing more powerful than a people who finally know who they are. They told you stories to shape your image, not to reflect your truth. They gave you labels to shrink your power, not to define your identity. From the beginning, the world built systems that benefited from making you believe you were less than, from making you doubt your reflection, from teaching you to apologize for existing. But the truth is, everything they told you was designed to hide what was already inside of you. You were not born broken. You were born brilliant. Before the chains, before the hurt, before the centuries of being misunderstood, your DNA was already royal, not royal by title handed down by some foreign crown, but royal by essence, by origin, by design. The roots of your ancestry reach back to lands that birthed nations, cradled wisdom, and gave rhythm to the world's heartbeat. You were never meant to be small. The world just tried to make you forget how large your legacy really is. When they saw the strength in your skin, they feared it. When they witnessed the fire in your eyes, they tried to dim it. When they heard the clarity in your voice, they worked to silence it. But none of their attempts could erase the truth that has always lived within you. Every gift you possess, every instinct that flows through you, every spiritual sense you carry, it all points back to a people whose power once guided the course of civilization. You come from a lineage of minds that built wonders without machines, healed without pills, led without cruelty, and worshipped with connection, not fear. You were told to see yourself through the lens of damage, but that lens was crafted by those who stood to gain from your doubt. Their survival required your confusion. Their dominance was built on your division. But now that illusion is breaking. The false narratives taught you to see inferiority where there is genius. They made you associate beauty with what didn't look like you, brilliance with what didn't sound like you, and holiness with what didn't include you. They rewrote history to erase your contributions, hoping that if you never saw yourself in the story, you'd stop believing you mattered. But now that the lies are exposed, the mirror is changing. And when you look at your reflection today, you begin to see not just skin, not just features, but echoes of ancient royalty. You begin to feel the pulse of your ancestors in your own heartbeat. You begin to understand that your very existence is proof of resilience, of survival, of sacred strength. This moment is not just about healing the past, it's about reclaiming the future. Because what's encoded in your DNA cannot be taken away by time or tactic. You were born with genius in your cells, vision in your blood, and purpose woven into every strand of your being. You are not the broken version they handed you. You are the restored version being remembered. You are the architect of futures not yet built. You are the answer to prayers whispered by generations who endured so you could rise. The world needs your voice, your walk, your wisdom, not in the shape they tried to force on you, but in the truth you were always meant to embody. You don't need to pretend to fit into a mold that was never meant for you. You were made to stand out, to stand tall, and to stand firm in the legacy you carry. There is power in knowing that your value does not come from permission. It comes from knowing that your journey is not a burden, it's a blueprint. That your creativity is not random, it's inherited. That your spirit is not weak, it's divine. The moment you stop chasing approval and start honoring your truth, the chains fall. Mental, emotional, spiritual. Because real royalty doesn't need a throne to know it reigns. It simply walks in alignment with the knowledge that it is enough, complete, chosen. You were never a mistake. You were never a statistic. You were never what they told you. You were something they never wanted you to realize, free, conscious, and awakening. The beauty of your story is that despite the deception, despite the oppression, despite the odds, you're still here. That's not by accident, that's destiny. Every time you rise, you are proving them wrong. Every dream you pursue, every truth you tell, every legacy you rebuild, you are reminding the world that royalty may be silenced for a season, but it can never be erased. So now is not the time to shrink. Now is not the time to doubt. Now is the time to walk in full remembrance of who you are, what you carry, and why you're here. Because the world has yet to see the full power of a people who truly remember their worth. And that time is now.
You were never meant to hide. You were never meant to shrink yourself to fit the expectations of systems that never wanted to see your full power. The world has seen versions of you, diluted and reshaped by generations of forced silence. But now, that time is ending. The world doesn't just want your presence, it needs your truth. Not the version molded by struggle alone, but the version shaped by fire, built by legacy, and carved from the spirit of those who endured everything just so you could rise. You are not random. You are not here by accident. You are a necessary part of something greater, a piece of healing, a wave of purpose, a reflection of what wholeness looks like when it's finally allowed to breathe. You carry answers in your voice that have never been spoken aloud. You hold ideas in your heart that the world has never seen come to life. You were designed with intention, not just to exist, but to expand, to influence, to lift others as you grow. Every step you take in your full self becomes a light in places where people have been walking in the dark for too long. And that light, it doesn't just guide, it awakens. When you speak from your truth, others remember their own. When you move with authenticity, you show others it's safe to be real. You're not just a person, you're a permission slip, a reminder, a spark, A sign that courage isn't just possible, it's powerful. There's been enough pretending, enough silence, enough waiting for permission that was never needed in the first place. You were already approved by the very breath you carry. You were already chosen when you survived what was meant to destroy you. There's no need to earn worth that was given to you at birth. The world has trained you to dim your light, to question your voice, to believe your presence was too much. But in truth, it was never too much. It was always just right. The world didn't fear your flaws, it feared your fullness. Because when you stand tall, systems tremble. When you walk boldly, chains break. When you speak clearly, confusion disappears. Now is not the time to second guess what you've been given. Now is the time to use it. You don't need every answer to start. You only need to stop hiding. Your identity is not a puzzle to solve. It's a truth to embody. Every lesson, every scar, every gift, it all prepared you for this moment. Because now, more than ever, the world is aching for truth. Not perfection, not performance, truth. And you are a carrier of that truth. You are proof that after centuries of silence, the real voice has returned. That healing can look like wholeness. That leadership can look like love. That change begins when we show up not just with our stories, but with our souls. You were not created to fit in places that don't honor your depth. You were built to lead in spaces that didn't even exist yet. Every part of you that was rejected before is exactly what the world is missing now. Your perspective, your rhythm, your way of seeing, your way of building, all of it is medicine. Not just for you, but for everyone around you. And when you step into your fullness, you're not just walking for yourself, you're walking for generations who couldn't. You're becoming the answer to their silent prayers, the embodiment of everything they hoped the world would one day see. It's no longer enough to survive. It's time to live loudly, clearly, fully, to stop hiding behind roles that don't fit, and to start creating a reality that reflects who you really are. Because the truth is, the world can only evolve when those who carry the deepest wisdom finally stop pretending they don't know the way. You know the way. You've always known it. You've just been taught to doubt it. But doubt has no place in the mind of someone who remembers where they come from. You come from strength. You come from truth. You come from a line of visionaries who saw beyond limitations and dared to dream anyway. So no more wait and more apologizing for your presence. No more shrinking to make others comfortable. The time has come for the real you to rise. And when you do, you won't just change your life. You'll change everything around you. Because that's the power of walking in your full identity. It shifts atmosphere. It awakens others. It creates freedom. And the world is desperate for freedom right now. So don't hold back. Don't look down. Don't delay. The time is now, and the world is ready. Not for a version of you, but for the real you.